London, 1888. Before dawn, the city is a hush of coal smoke and damp stone. Gas lamps hiss along narrow streets, their light smeared by fog that clings to brick and bone alike. Footsteps echo, quickened by a cold that gnaws through boots. A horse snorts somewhere out of sight. A door latch clicks, then silence again, so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. In the rookeries of Whitechapel, where alleys thread like veins and poverty lives shoulder to shoulder with desperation, people sleep lightly. They sleep with one hand on their coin and one eye on the door. But tonight, on a street called Bucks Row, a figure moves with a surgeon's calm. He brings with him an indifference colder than the Thames itself. When a body is found, only the first in a series, London will awaken into a nightmare it cannot name. The press will christen him with a stage name that will never fade. Police will chase their own shadows, and the killer will slip into the fog as if he'd never been there at all. Who was he? A butcher? A doctor? A ghost wearing a man's skin? And why did the murders stop as suddenly as they began? This is the story of the autumn when a city lost its breath. This is Jack the Ripper, the killer who vanished into the fog. But what investigators found next would change everything. The East End in the late 19th century is a pressure cooker. Factories belch smoke by day. By night, the lanes fill with the unhoused, the unemployed, and the unlucky. Lodging houses sell beds by the hour. Workhouses loom like fortresses. Gin shops glow like beacons for those who need warmth or oblivion. You can smell onions frying and tallow candles burning. You can taste the soot. Beneath this grit runs a current of humanity that refuses to break. Costermongers call out their fruit. A mother braids her daughter's hair by firelight. Tailors bend closer to seams, sighing over the price of thread. And on street corners, weary women bargain for a few coins to carry them to morning. No romance here, just the arithmetic of survival. Into this world steps a phantom, not with a flourish, not even with a sound. He blends easily, in a wool coat, perhaps with the brim of his hat pulled low. He isn't noticed because there are 1,000 men like him, and that was always his secret. In a place where life is cheap and doors are thin, he chooses his stage. And all the city's eyes are looking the other way. But what investigators found next would change everything. It is the last days of August when a man with a horse and cart rattles down Bucks Row. He sees something in the gutter that shouldn't be there. His lantern dips, and the light licks across the face of a woman who looks as though she's fallen asleep in the street. Only she isn't sleeping. Her name is Mary and Nichols, known to friends as Polly. A mother, a woman who has argued with landlords, laughed with friends, and tried, so many times, to piece together a steady life. She wore a bonnet once. She sang once. Her story is not vice or virtue. It's a ledger of debts and hopes and the bad luck of being born in the wrong corner of town. When the constable arrives, the fog seems to recoil from his lantern. He crouches. He notes the cuts. He notes how swiftly the killer worked, how strangely precise. There is no shouting of heroics, only the measured patience of a man measuring horror. Word travels fast, and with it spreads an idea that maybe this wasn't just a crime, maybe it was a message. Did the killer watch from the shadows as the crowd gathered? Did he listen to the whispers? Who would do such a thing? Did he enjoy the helplessness of a street that could not protect one of its own? Fear sharpens. The press descends. A line has been crossed that cannot be uncrossed. But what investigators found next would change everything. The morning papers unfurl like flags. Words snarl over inked columns. Brutal, savage, fiendish. Soon they will find a name that sells. For now they sell fear. You can feel the city tightening. Men escort women home with fists clenched in their coat pockets. Landladies watch their steps, taking care not to walk alone. Policemen march with new urgency, truncheons tapping like metronomes against their legs. The air changes. Even the fog seems to thicken with suspicion. How did he get so close? How did no one hear? The humanity of Whitechapel fights back in the small ways it knows. Neighbors keep watch. Lodging housekeepers start to memorize faces, times, alibis. A few talk of moving away. Most have nowhere to go. And over every doorstep, a question hangs like laundry. Will he come back? In station houses, detectives spread maps across tables scarred by decades of other cases. Pins go in streets, times, witnesses. They talk of patterns. They talk of experts. They talk and then fall quiet because something about the precision speaks to practice. A rumor floats like a paper boat. Maybe the killer knows anatomy. Maybe he's worked with a knife more than once. If he has, who taught him? The city waits for an answer. It won't have to wait long. But what investigators found next would change everything. 2 weeks later, the sun rises over Hanbury Street like a coin rolling up a slope. In a backyard behind a tenement, a woman is found. Her name is Annie Chapman. She has a sister who will never forget the telegram, a daughter who will keep her mother's picture hidden under a scarf, and a friend who will replay a last conversation until the words lose all meaning. The scene is colder now. Not the air is mild, but the feeling. This is not an accident or an argument. It's staged. It's deliberate. And there is a signature, something that says, I was here, and I'll be here again if you don't stop me. A witness recalls a man with a voice, like a gentleman. Another remembers boots. The investigators begin to hear the same chords repeating. A quiet spot, a swift attack, a ghastly efficiency in the dark. If there is a pattern, there is also escalation. And in escalation, there is a promise of more. Neighbors ring bells. The Bishop of Bedford calls for change in Parliament. Newspapers thunder. And in the midst of this, a quieter army rises. Ordinary people who knew Annie by name, who sold her tea, who lent her a shawl on a rainy night. They gather, not to gape, but to grieve. The killer has given London a terrible gift, a common enemy, but he has also given it a clock. It's ticking. But what investigators found next would change everything. On a desk cooled by an autumn draft, an envelope arrives at a newsroom. Red ink, a jaunty voice, a laugh that sounds like a grin. It's signed with a name the world will never forget, Jack the Ripper. Soon there's another letter, an even more mocking tone, Saucy Jackie. Whether genuine or the work of a clever hoaxer, the effect is the same. A face is painted onto a shadow. I keep on hearing the police have caught me. The letter jeers in print the following day. But they won't fix me just yet. Somewhere, compositors feed lines into printing presses, and the city wakes to a headline that turns a murderer into a myth. The police are skeptical. They have to be. But the public leans in. Names and stories give shape to fear, and fear wants a mouth to put its words in. And this mouth is witty, theatrical, fearless. In public houses, men argue whether a doctor would taunt like this. In schoolyards, boys dare one another to walk down Hanbury Street at twilight. In parlors, respectable ladies touch the paper with gloves on and wonder, what sort of man writes this way? Investigators sort letters by the sackful, chasing ink trails that lead everywhere and nowhere. 1,000 false Jacks drown out the silence of the real one. Why write at all? Ego? Mischief? Or a calculated effort to keep the city's attention while the killer hunts again? But what investigators found next would change everything. September turns and London exhales too soon. On a Saturday night stretching into Sunday morning, the city buzzes with payday merriment. Music drifts from gin shops. Street lamps blush through the mist. At a corner near Burner Street, a woman named Elizabeth Stride is found. Her life has been hard. Love, labor, illness, and the constant seesaw of fortune. She's gone now, and the wounds suggest the same hand. Yet something feels incomplete, as if the killer was interrupted. Minutes matter. Half an hour later, less than a mile away, Catherine Eddowes is discovered in Mitre Square. She has a son, a man who will spend his later years reading everything ever printed about his mother, hoping for a sentence that makes sense of none of it. He won't find it. 2 scenes. One night, the city staggers. The police sprint between districts, jurisdiction lines blurring in their urgency. Lanterns swing. Statements are taken. Boots thud on cobbles. The fog holds its breath, as if even it understands something terrible has doubled. Reporters run to telegraphs. Editors shout for maps. The morning headlines will coin it perfectly: the double event. How can a man move so freely through a city suddenly so awake? How can he choose his moments with such predatory timing? The answer lies on a dark stairway, in chalk. But what investigators found next would change everything. In the early hours, a constable's lamp washes a doorway in pale light. Nearby, a piece of bloodied cloth, the kind of detail investigators latch onto and never let go. Above it, chalked on the wall, a message. The words will be debated for a century, their spelling and intent dissected and redissected. But tonight they are a fuse on a powder keg. Is it a taunt? A misdirection? A spark aimed at lighting old hatreds into new flames? The superintendent makes a decision that will be second-guessed longer than any other. The writing comes down before daylight. He fears a riot. He fears more than one. One act of erasure births 1,000 theories. Without the writing to study, people imagine their own versions of it, each one bending toward their fear, their prejudice, their politics. For some, the message is proof. For others, it is bait. The cloth is bagged. The wall is washed. And with a few swipes of a wet rag, the best clue of the night becomes a ghost story. What was the killer thinking as he moved away from the doorway? Did he know his words would vanish? Or did he trust legend to do his work for him? Whatever the case, the city is now chasing shadows with shadows. But what investigators found next would change everything. Whitechapel becomes a theater of suspects. A Polish barber whose movements are odd. A doctor with unsavory stories trailing behind him like loose threads. A barrister whose disappearance feels too timely. A quack whose swagger and wallet make him unavoidable. Each name flares and fades. In pubs, patrons lean together and whisper surnames as if saying them out loud might summon the man himself. In drawing rooms, amateur detectives chart their own diagrams, drawing arrows with stubby pencils from lodging houses to alley mouths and back again. Everyone has a theory, and no one has proof. The police, often mocked, are dogged. Detectives walk until their feet blister. They pin new names to old maps. They question nurses, butchers, midwives, watchmen. Bloodhounds are discussed, then dismissed, then discussed again. Officers ride through streets at night, listening for a woman's shout. The city is a net, but every net has holes. An inspector studies a map and sees the murders cluster around a habit, a line of life as regular as a morning commute. Is the killer local? A man of the lanes? Someone whose motion through the streets raises no eyebrows at all? He may be. He may be the neighbor who nods and says good evening. The knife could be wrapped in brown paper under his bed, and no one would know. If he is so ordinary, perhaps that is his brilliance. Evil that looks like everyone else is the easiest kind to miss. If you're still here, subscribe, because stories like this deserve more eyes and more voices. But what investigators found next would change everything. November arrives like steel. At Miller's Court, a small room with a small fire holds the last known scene. Mary Jane Kelly is younger than the others, and she is remembered by neighbors for her singing. Snatches of Irish songs, sung soft when rent was late and louder when the coins clinked just right. She spoke of a lover who might return, of a trip to the provinces that might yet be real. She kept hope where she could. What happens in that room is the darkest page of the autumn. We will not dwell on it. Respect for the dead sets limits the living must honor. What matters is who Mary was, a human being, full of contradictions and dreams, and how violently those dreams were erased. Investigators crowd the doorway. Doctors confer in hushed tones. Reporters hover like moths just beyond the flame of the official line. The press is already writing that the killer has finally shown his full capacity. The public, reading at breakfast, will put down their cups with shaking hands. And then nothing. The knife goes quiet. The fog thins. The city braces for another blow that does not come. Did the killer die? Did he flee? Did he simply decide, in a place beyond logic, that his story was over? In the silence after the scream, London doesn't know whether to feel relief or dread. But what investigators found next would change everything. If the murderer vanished, investigators did not. They adjust. They invent. They turn to modernity with the hunger of men who know time is their enemy. At station houses, photographs of suspects are compared with witness sketches. Plaster casts record footprints, although the damp clay of Whitechapel rarely cooperates. Autopsy findings are studied with an intensity new to the public eye, their language carefully filtered for a readership that craves answers but recoils from detail. Forensics is a baby learning to walk, and every step matters. Police try to standardize beat times, to narrow windows of opportunity. They draft question lists designed to catch lies that are told too smoothly. They begin to understand geographic profiling long before that term is coined, reading the city's flow as if it were a living thing. They recognize patterns and also their limits. A false pattern can mislead as badly as no pattern at all. And each time a promising lead evaporates, the morale of good men sags, then stiffens again, because giving up is a luxury the uniform does not allow. We look back and wonder, if they'd had fingerprints, DNA, cameras on every corner, would we know his name? Or did his camouflage run deeper than tools can cut? But what investigators found next would change everything. To tell this story only with fear is to miss its other half. Look closer. In Whitechapel, kindness moves like contraband, quietly, but it moves. A baker gives bread on credit to a woman who has already broken his trust twice. A policeman walks a widow home past her doorstep, just to make sure no shadow follows. A priest sits under a lamplight and writes a letter to Parliament about the despair lining these streets like soot. Women share scarves. Men share rumor, which is the poor man's insurance against surprise. And there is dignity in the smallest defiance. In the morning market, a fishwife laughs so loudly at an off-color joke that onlookers flinch and then, unable to help themselves, smile. On a stoop, a child blows a soap bubble that floats up like a tiny moon and then breaks on the brim of a constable's hat. And even he smiles, though he is so tired he can see the fog moving in his sleep. The killer has taken much, but he cannot take the heartbeat of a neighborhood that refuses to disappear. And yet the question remains like a knife left on a table. He's out there, or he was. Can an entire city keep watch forever? But what investigators found next would change everything. Winter rolls in, sharpening the air, scraping breath into white. The murders stop. There are panicked reports, false alarms, copycats, opportunists. But the pattern, the signature, the terrible fluency of the autumn's work. It ends. A suspect drowns in the Thames, and some officers breathe easier. Another suspect disappears across the sea, and others nod grimly. A third is quietly committed to an asylum, and the district's fear eases by inches. None of these conclusions come with proof. They come with stories, and stories are what people live on when facts run out. The legend of Jack the Ripper begins precisely where the evidence ends. The fog that once hid him now preserves him. He becomes a campfire tale told in parlors and police academies, in libraries and on walking tours. He lives because the city never saw him leave. Does vanishing make him more real or less? And if the worst thing you ever did is also the last thing you did, are you erased by your own ending or immortalized by it? For London, the answer is both. But what investigators found next would change everything. Decades pass, then a century. New tools arrive. Forensic science with edges sharp enough to slice a hair. Scholars prod the past, lifting pages with cotton gloves. DNA studies flicker across headlines, promising closure and delivering controversy. A shawl, a stamp, a rumor. The name Kosminski is floated, debated, battered. The name Druitt rises, sinks, rises again. Tumblety, Chapman, Barnett, Gull, the carousel spins. Each theory tells us as much about the teller as the told. Some crave the killer's ordinariness. A man like any other, not a monster, but a neighbor who hid his storms under calm skies. Others need grandeur. A surgeon with terrifying skill, a gentleman predator, a figure who could walk into a drawing room and pass unnoticed while the city hunted him outside. People argue over handwriting, over routes home in the dark, over which letter is real and which was penned by a bored journalist at midnight. In the internet age, the map grows infinite, forums, archives, podcasts, essays, reenactments. The case feeds on attention. Attention feeds on the case. And somewhere beyond all this, the women remain. Mary and Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, Mary Jane. Their names should be the ones that anchor the story, the ones we say first and last. Because the point is not the stardom of a killer, it's the humanity he stole. Are we closer than ever to naming him? Or, like fog in a lantern's beam, does certainty still slip through our fingers? But what investigators found next would change everything. Strip the case down to its bones, and what remains? A silhouette that fits too many men. A method both simple and theatrical. A killing ground chosen for convenience and cover. A psychology that feels twin, rage and control, cruelty and calm. Imagine him for a minute, not to glorify but to understand how he moved. He knows the lanes where light dies. He knows where doors are thin and windows are blind. He speaks softly enough to disarm. He moves quickly enough to preempt. He is not a genius. He is not supernatural. He is something worse, practiced. He leaves scenes that erase his face because they magnify his echo. He vanishes not by magic, but by the elementary power of anonymity in a crowded city. He is not seen because no one was looking at him before, and even after, everyone is looking for the wrong details, the hat, the bag, the coat, while the only true constant is opportunity. If there is a lesson here for all cities in all centuries, it is this: evil often borrows the wardrobe of the ordinary. It blends, it waits, and then, if we are lucky, it stops. Not because we won, but because time, chance, or chaos interrupted its march. What would we say to him if we could? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps we would turn away and say the names of the dead instead. But what investigators found next would change everything. The East End today is not the East End of 1888. The lanes are brighter, the roofs tighter, the beds not sold by the hour. But walk at dawn on a cold day, and you can still feel the city's memory rising from the cobbles like breath. Stories live long in brick and in the spaces between buildings. Local guides lead visitors past the old sites, now ordinary corners dressed in modern paint. People listen and nod, and sometimes you can hear a city learning how to retell itself. Less about the shock, more about the context. Less about the faceless man, more about the faces of the women. Policing has changed, too. The case helped give the world a vocabulary of patterns, geographic profiling, the importance of interagency cooperation. It taught, painfully, how timid bureaucracy can be the enemy of urgent truth. It revealed how media can help and harm in the same breath, how attention both spotlights and distorts. And in living rooms across the world, when documentaries roll and voices drop to a hush, people lean closer. Not because fear is amusing, but because mystery is a mirror. We study the unknown to understand ourselves. What are we capable of, for better or worse? How do we protect one another when rules aren't enough? What do we owe the dead? In these questions, the case is no longer history. It is a conversation that keeps going. But what investigators found next would change everything. Return, finally, to the lamplit lanes. Imagine the killer's last walk through Whitechapel, whether to the river, the rail, or simply home. The fog curls around him as if it knows his name. But the city does not. The city will not. He passes market stalls being set up for morning trade. He passes a woman carrying bread in a basket. He passes a constable who nods by habit. The world refuses to rearrange itself for him. And so he becomes a rumor wrapped in a coat. Behind him, in rooms that will be washed and relit, the autumn hardens into memory. A boy will grow into a man who cannot pass a dark doorway without glancing in. A sister will keep a scarf her whole life and never wear it. An inspector will hear boots in his dreams. A city will learn to be both gentler and more watchful. In the end, the fog thins. Daylight pools in alleys. Shopkeepers lift shutters with a rattle. A little girl chases a hoop. Someone whistles. And the world, because it must, goes on. But under that daylight lies a question that refuses to die. Who was Jack the Ripper? The answer remains on the far side of a closed door, behind a face we never properly saw. Perhaps that is why the story endures, not just because of what was done, but because of what was never known. Does mystery give a monster power, or does it give the living a reason to keep looking out for one another? As the last lamp gutters and the city exhales, one truth stands. The names we should remember most are not the one in the letters, but the ones written in tenderness on headstones and held in family lore spoken low: Mary and Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Their lives deserve the final word. If the story moved you, if you felt the chill of those streets and the ache of those families, share this video so their names travel farther than the fog ever did. If you're still here, subscribe, because stories like this deserve more eyes and more voices. And now, the question that keeps the lamps burning long after midnight. What do you think happened? Leave your theory in the comments. Someone out there knows the truth.